you really just have to get up every morning and give a shit about like something that 99.999% of the world does not give a shit about. I have to get up every day and focus on selling.
Hey, Dan, welcome to Bite Size. We've just spent the last 10 minutes kind of getting to know each other a little bit better. I know we've been connected on Twitter for a while, or X, should I say. But great to meet you properly. Big fan of what you're building and how you're building in public as well. But for anyone who doesn't know you or what you're up to, why don't you just give a quick kind of 3 to 5 minute career story of where you started and what you're currently doing now?
Yeah, Daniel, thanks for having me on. As you said, it's been fun to get to know you a little bit on X over the last couple of weeks to months, and excited to be on the podcast, which I learned is a pretty big podcast in our initial 10-minute conversation here. Dan McCormick, founder, CEO of Create. Create's a modern creatine brand. Our first product was the creatine monohydrate gummy. We sell it in a variety of different flavors and kind of packages. So the reason I started Create, both personal and kind of professional. Personally, I've been taking creatine for well over a decade. Like many people, started taking it for the first time during freshman of high school football, American football, and had a really positive experience with it. Shortly after kind of freshman football season, realized I didn't have a career in professional football and switched to cross country and track. But oddly enough, kept with the creatine supplementation. At the time, very few high school runners are taking creatine. I perhaps had a little bit more of a bulky body than most runners. But anyway, always kind of stuck with creatine throughout high school, college, post-college. Always had a really positive experience with the supplement. Interestingly, to me, relative to other supplements, it always did what it purported to do, which is help build strength, build muscle, improve recovery, increase energy levels. And I never personally experienced many of the downsides that were taught to learn about creatine over the past 20 years. My hair didn't fall out, my skin didn't break out, I wasn't having kidney failure. And so my personal experience kind of juxtaposed to what I was taught to believe about creatine, there was just a gap, there was a chasm between those two things. And I thought that always was interesting to me. At the same time, I spent kind of the last 6 or 7 years in e-commerce since I graduated school, worked at these companies like Away and Parade, learned a ton about brand building, learned a ton about what to do when building a company, and also potentially some of the mistakes to avoid when building the company. And so took those two learnings and thought there was a really big opportunity in the creatine space. When I started, there was kind of these early signs of kind of mass market adoption of creatine. We're now kind of 18 months into this story, and creatine is the fastest growing category in VMS. I'm seeing SPINS data that creatine consumption and retail grew 235% this year. So it's a kind of a massive wave of creatine adoption. Our goal is to become the most credible brand in the space, do so by using kind of not only traditional ways of building credibility and through quality and certifications and regulatory, but also bring a fresh approach to go to market for creatine. Traditionally, it's been niched away for male bodybuilders and super serious athletes. And our view is that many people, almost everybody, can benefit from proper creatine supplementation. And our brand is positioned in order to take advantage of that. So we launched about 13 months ago in the market. And as I said, working on it for about 6 months before that. First year, just in terms of scale, did just about $5 million, not fully profitable, but contribution margin profitable. And we are today a predominantly e-commerce business, so selling on D2C and Amazon and a few other digital retailers, but hope to share in the coming months our transition to an omni-channel brand.
Amazing. You mentioned that part of your background, you've always been in e-commerce and worked at some other big brands, and you learned like how to build a brand, some of the upside and things that were working well, but also some of the things to avoid. What were the one or two things that really stood out to you that you took into your journey when building Create?
Yeah, so those two companies, Away and Parade, for those that are not aware of those companies, Away basically invented the four-wheel Rolly smart suitcase back in like 2015, 2016, grew to hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, basically on one-time purchases back in kind of the late 2010s. Massive business, was valued at like $1.4 billion at its height. They just had a really strong perspective of what the brand meant and how they showed up in the world. And they were also at the time, just given kind of the capital in the space, the innovation around the D2C business model. This is 2017, 2018. D2C was like, whoa, what is this? They were able to attract a ton of smart people to the company. And so I built a really strong network from that experience. Parade in many of the same ways, really strong brand, knew exactly who their customer was. I think had a really strong view of like how they wanted to show up in the world. And so both of those companies just like really strong brand builders and kind of world builders in that sense. And then on the same side, like obviously learnings on, I think, Away's troubles have been well documented. Parade recently sold for, I think, kind of well below expectations, and a few mistakes there. Those companies just got kind of way over their skis on inventory and challenges around inventory, really built large companies before kind of the physics of the business were able to hold it. And so trying to learn from those mistakes while also pulling obviously some of the magic that those brands were able to create into Create.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned a couple of times in that sentence around how they just really understood the consumer, who they were going after, and correlating that over to Create. And being someone who grew up in gyms, doing sport, boxing since I was young, went through a phase of, I'd say, being a bodybuilder. I got pretty jacked, and I was taking creatine at the time. I'm not anymore. Creatine's been around for a long time. So knowing your consumer, but also knowing that you want to try and change the atypical consumer of creatine, how have you gone about doing that through either your marketing, your messaging, or your overall branding?
Yeah, so I think exactly like to kind of base that answer, who Away's customer was kind of like a 32-year-old millennial living in a coastal city that was perhaps an early adopter of like Instagram power usage back in 2017, 2018. Parade's core customer was a dime square, kind of like 21-year-old girl that dropped out of NYU, right? And so they had a really strong view of who that customer was. Of course, that probably made up like 5% of the actual customer base. Like you build this aspirational customer, you serve that really strong 5%. But of course, if you have to kind of scale mass market beyond that. For me, we're not going after the bodybuilders, we're not going after kind of the Gymshark culture. That is not who our core customer is. And frankly, that's not who I am. I never was a bodybuilder. I was never a super serious athlete. I'm someone that goes to the gym 5 times a week. I work out between 45 minutes to an hour every day. I'm always in really good shape. I care about what I'm putting in my body. I take health and wellness seriously, but I'm not, putting up YouTube videos around benching 400 pounds. And there are brands that are totally geared around that customer. That is not great. Surprisingly, for a creatine brand, about 50% of our customers are female, and the distribution of age is pretty evenly distributed between 18 years old to 65 years old, relative to other D2C brands. So we don't have as strong as like a core customer other than people that take their health and wellness seriously and are looking to try new things when it comes to supplementation.
And I think the delivery method, as you mentioned as well, obviously the overall branding, it's obviously clear that was the intention going into it. It's not for that Gymshark. And typically I don't know if it's necessarily completely new, but the delivery method, rather than being in like a pre-workout shake or a powder, I think that's probably a big part of it as well, right? In terms of tapping into a different type of demographic who doesn't want to be downing dry scooping powder at the gym at the water fountain.
Yeah, exactly. From a delivery perspective, the gummy, we went pretty heavily from Goli on this, right? They took apple cider vinegar, a compound that very few people take in liquid form today as a percentage of total population, put it into a form factor that's delicious, convenient, can easily be stored in your kitchen, is not messy, can travel with it. And suddenly they go from basically launching in 2018 to a $200 million business in 2020. So we had evidence that like the form factor is able to take these compounds that are otherwise kind of hard to build into a routine and explode it. For us, additionally, we had all the baggage of creatine white powder, NO Explode, if you know that brand back from the mid 2000s, all the intense like cocaine looking creatine powder brands of the last 20 years. we had that baggage as we were starting this brand. And so the gummy is a really interesting way to juxtapose towards those or against those more powder-based brands. And so, yes, like the core reason that it's in the gummy is that people enjoy taking gummies, and because they enjoy taking gummies, they'll take the gummies more consistently. Because they take the gummies more consistently, they'll have better results with creatine supplementation because you need to be taking it 5 to 7 days a week. But separately, it is just juxtaposed to kind of the 2020 or the 2000s gym bro culture that is so associated with that white creatine powder.
You mentioned your consumer ranges from kind of 18 all the way up to, did you say 65? So really broad. Have you learned that after the fact, or was that your target consumer group?
Yeah, no. So I went on and on about how Away and Braid really knew their customer. I actually took a pretty different approach when building this. I let Meta help us find who our core customer was. We built a intentionally pretty vague brand as to the color scheme and the name and the imagery and everything that we stood for. It's pretty, I would say, widely applicable to a bunch of different groups. It's mass market, and that was intentional. Our belief is that, and like almost everybody can benefit from proper creatine supplementation, say very small people or populations of people that already have renal dysfunction or other pre-existing medical conditions that kind of disqualify them from creatine supplementation. There's just such a full body of research around who creatine is safe and effective for, everything from high school athletes all the way up to people that are elderly populations that are dealing with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases, and everything in between, which is a challenge, right? You have something that's good for everybody, which makes it marketing it. If it's good for everybody, it's almost good for nobody from a marketing perspective. And within that challenge, you're like, all right, who is better? What is better than anything else in the world at kind of helping solve that issue? And that's Meta. That's throwing a ton of different creative angles at Meta and saying, hey, go find the most efficient customers for us. And so we still do that today. I would say we started to narrow in a little bit on like call it 35 to 45-year-old men and women, but we're a year into it and that could change over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we in the performance marketing world, we know that obviously creative is the variable and Meta will find the target customers, but then how you craft that specific messaging to try and find different cohorts of potential customers, so that you went broad on everything and then have probably, correct me if I'm wrong, to your point, learn, well, who are the different demographics, and therefore you can start creating that creative and messaging and content that speaks specifically to where you're seeing the best performance.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like we didn't have a perspective on who this may work for, right? Like an early thesis was that, TikTok gym girls are going to love this product. So we seeded hundreds of TikTok gym girls, but the brand was not necessarily geared towards them. So when we found out that, hey, this might actually not be the best customer for us, it wasn't totally off brand to then go, oh, also maybe let's test 45-year-old gym dads that are getting back into the gym for the first time in like 10 years. And so the brand was just kind of flexible enough that we were able to test into different populations, and it allows us to continue to test in different populations.
And where you're at now, you mentioned, that's some pretty rapid growth that you achieved. What were the foundational kind of marketing philosophies and tactics? What really worked for you in addition to the testing you're talking about on Meta? Was it TikTok spend? Have you done large influencer pushes? Like maybe there's more than one. What was the biggest catalyst to growth?
I would say breaking it down between acquisition and retention. The acquisition doesn't work without the retention. So we're a subscription business, or subscription's at least a big part of our business. About 40% of our revenue on a daily basis is just recurring revenue. And so that gives us a lot of room to play with on the acquisition front. Where we found, and this isn't going to get the most exciting answer for your audience perhaps, but like Meta is the most efficient use of our incremental dollar still to this day. Not like we're super scaled. We probably have a few $1 million a month until we start to hit that ceiling and need to start optimizing for even other objectives on Meta before we even think about other channels. And we test in a little bit to like TikTok, and we of course play on Google, but Meta really is the major engine of acquisition growth today.
I actually don't think that is a really boring answer, because I actually think And I've spoken about this with multiple people on the podcast, and we see this time and time again, channel diversification. It's good to be testing, but we see time and time again for e-com DTC brands, your bread and butter is often going to be Meta and Google. And you got to be really careful. Are you diversifying because there's an opportunity, or are you diversifying because you just haven't figured the channel out, right? And they are two very different scenarios. Like saying Meta doesn't work and therefore I'm going to go and try a different platform. I would argue you just haven't figured out the dynamic of creative landing pages, messaging, and everything else, and maybe even just fundamental media buying to support it. So I think that's a really good reminder, actually, to people listening that Meta does still work. You've got to find the variables for your brand that are going to work on the channel before thinking channel diversification is going to solve all my problems because Meta's not working for me anymore.
Right. And there's some products where the physics of that product or that brand don't necessarily lend itself super well to Meta today. Mattresses being a pretty good example. Like you have to have pretty high intent. It's not like you just see a Casper ad today on Meta randomly cold and go buy a mattress. Back in 2015 when CPMs were, very cheap, that math did work. But today, given how expensive everything's becoming, like, mattresses, the customer's already in the funnel for some other reason from demand not created on Meta. And so those brands invest in Google and other kind of like research-driven, search-driven channels. But for brands that like, if your product has the characteristics that it should work on Meta, I would go as far to say that like, if it doesn't work on Meta, you have pretty big issues. It's not like you're going to be able to take that to TikTok paid and be able to scale that on TikTok paid. Yes, you may be able to scale it on TikTok organic for whatever reason, but on TikTok paid, if it's not scaling on Meta, likely will not be scaling on TikTok paid.
Yeah, agreed. Having worked with quite a lot of supplement companies myself, influencers and creators were typically a really huge part of that, both organic, driving that kind of top of funnel awareness and leveraging within paid. What's been your approach with working with influencers and creators?
Yeah, so we don't have any macro influencers associated with the brands. I think like when you do look at the successful supplement companies today, they've all done a really good job of eventually working their way up to the Hubermans and the Rogans and the Atias and those types of guys. At Bloom also has some macro influencers supporting them as well. For us, we work with folks that have anywhere between 75,000 to basically 500,000 followers. And we work with them in a pretty standard manner. And there's variables that change within each relationship, but essentially we get them on, call it a 3-month initial retainer. We're paying them, somewhere between $500 to $3,000 a month. And as part of that retainer, they're posting, 1 or 2 collab reels a month on Instagram. They're putting up a bunch of stories. Importantly, they're delivering us an ad package. So this is content that doesn't need to go up on their feed, but is content created with the express purpose that we're going to have an editor cut it into an ad that's optimized for Meta. And so we're basically able to amortize that monthly retainer costs across a bunch of different marketing activities, whether it's in-feed posts, stories, paid performance creative, affiliate, all these different things. And so that's been our approach. We probably have like 15 to 20 people active at any given time, actively producing content. We're constantly testing new people and people that generally connect with. We try to use that as a lever to testing into new populations of people. So we'll have a Brian Mazza, who's like a hybrid athlete, really speaks to kind of that 38-year-old guy that's aspirationally wanting to get in shape. Or we'll have, a Nikki Font is one of ours who's maybe a 24-year-old gym girl that kind of her entire life is geared around wellness and gym routines and the supplements that she's taking. So yeah, it's an interesting way to kind of test into populations and where we should double down on creative.
How much do you provide detailed scripts and scopes and shoot this in this way and say this and say that versus you've got creative flexibility because we're going to chop it up and edit it in our own way post anyway for the use within ads?
Yeah, the latter. We obviously send an FAQ to folks around main talking points, but essentially we say, you're the creator. We know your audience is going to resonate with. We don't want this to come across as inauthentic. And honestly, if we have a script and we send that to 10 different people, we're going to get back content that's not that diverse. And so we'd rather kind of that diversity of content give us a bunch of different angles that we can then cut into ads or content.
Yeah, makes sense. There's two sides of the coin on that one. It seems, from what I see, different marketing teams and marketing people talk about, whether it's you need to be really prescriptive and say this, say that, otherwise the quality is not going to be good. I think that's probably more so for mass creator versus where you're working with consistent people over time, and the vetting process is a bit different when you're holding people onto retainers, as you mentioned you are.
Yeah, if I'm paying $60,000 for one Instagram post with like a macro influencer, I'm going to want to have a little bit more creative control than a creator that I'm getting, a few deliverables of content a month from.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned subscription obviously is a big part of the business and how that ties into your initial customer acquisition costs on Meta. Talk a bit more about the challenges of getting, because subscription is the holy grail for many brands. It's not just that easy that, well, everyone who purchases, they're going to want to subscribe. Talk to me a bit more about maybe just your setup there and how you've gone about driving that kind of adoption to your subscription program.
Yeah, I mean, I think it first starts with the product that we're selling. It's a product that's geared towards habitual daily use. Creatine, you're supposed to take it every day. I think best practice today would be that you're not supposed to cycle on and off of it. And so it's something that you can really build into your daily routine. And so that is just geared tremendously well towards a subscription model. There's tactics that we can use to kind of make the subscription offering more attractive than a one-time purchase. That's a traditional 10 to 15% discount, free shipping, additional perks when subscribing, defaulting towards subscription on landing pages versus one-time purchase, ensuring that the order because it's a subscription, a bunch of those kind of e-commerce tactics. But again, I think it all goes back to the product is actually geared towards a subscription, whether it's monthly or if you're buying on a quarterly basis and getting a 3-month supply at once. It comes down to the fact that you're going to be taking this product on a daily basis if you want to see best results.
I mean, like you said, there's all those e-com tactics that probably most people know. One of the things I'm keen to get your take on is whether it's something you do that I've seen work really well with subscriptions is it's how you communicate with people in between purchase cycles, right? In above and beyond, don't forget that your next subscription is coming. It's that value-add community building, VIP building, which could be, especially for a brand like yours, I'm going to assume maybe you are, maybe you're not, workout inspo, workout ideas, like health and fitness. Do you see what I mean? It's like keeping those customers engaged, but also within their subscription, that value add in above and beyond just, I think what many default to is, well, get them in. Okay, great. They're going to purchase. We've got them.
I wish it was that easy.
Yeah, exactly. How do you, or anything you can say about how you're kind of approaching the touch base with your subscribers that's helping kind of increase that lifetime value and keeping them within the subscription program?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I wish we were doing a better job of providing value to customers in between purchases. I think the product is valuable in and of itself, and we get a fair amount of leash from that. But I think there are these kind of ancillary benefits that we could offer, whether it's video education, workout plans, other things that when matched with the product actually make the product more valuable. We just haven't implemented them today. It's a fine line to your point of like, how can I be in communication with this subscriber, making sure that they feel comfortable with the plan, making sure that they're getting value from us between purchases, and like communicating with the customer too much to the point where, you're notifying them constantly that like they're paying X amount of dollars a month for this product. And like, you obviously don't want to hide anything or make it hard for them to manage their subscription, but you wouldn't want to be texting them every day being like, hey, by the way, this has cost you $3 today to take this product. So it's a fine line. And I think, the biggest one of advice is kind of letting the product speak for itself, such that the customer's getting core value out of the main product versus trying to basically trick them into staying subscribed for longer than they otherwise will.
That's a really good point. I think not thinking subscription is, oh, I've caught them, or trying to trick them into something that they don't actually want is never the goal. And it all comes down to the value of the product and how much they like it. At the end of the day, you can almost do anything within these tactics, but if they don't ultimately use and see the benefits of the product, they're probably not going to stay subscribed. And it's a very obvious thing to say, and every brand owner, founder, everybody who's been on this podcast says, but the number one retention tactic is having a great product. If you have a great product, everything else is just supporting in there loyalty and experience with the brand, right?
And so in our first year, certainly had like a bit of a learning curve on getting the product 100% dialed in. And the biggest drops in retention were when we'd have a week-long period where, it was extra hot and our product was not perfectly formulated at the time to be heat resistant. And, for 7 days, all of our subscribers were getting melted product. Those are the biggest dips in subscription, not some like marketing tactic or that flow that we did or did not use at the time. So it really does come down to product.
Go more into kind of the entrepreneurial journey. So obviously you've been in the space since you left college. You mentioned always in DTC and now stepping into the entrepreneurial, building your own brand. What have been some of the biggest challenges or roadblocks that maybe have surprised you along the way of building the business to where it's at?
Yeah. So this is my first kind of foray into true entrepreneurship. I've always kind of worked at startups, but never had as much skin in the game as I do now. So I come from like kind of a family of entrepreneurs. Both my parents own small businesses. Both my siblings had their own businesses. And so kind of growing up around the kitchen table business, like with some people talk about sports and politics at the table, we always talk about kind of like, hey mom, what'd you learn at your client today? Or dad, like, why is that guy pissing you off at work today? And so business was kind of always what we talked about around the kitchen table. And it's always been kind of my number one interest. I think some of the challenges coming into it, and this is nothing novel to anyone that does this, but like you really just have to get up every morning and give a shit about like something that 99.999% of the world does not give a shit about. I have to get up every day and focus on selling creatine gummies and be more focused on selling creatine gummies than anyone else in the world could rationally be willing to care about at that level. And so just like the consistent daily dedication to one specific topic is how these businesses, at least in the early stage, before we're able to build the machine, kind of the self-fulfilling machine, how these businesses move forward. So I'm on day 600 of like really, really giving a shit about creatine gummies, and like basically the business only moving forward insofar as I care about creatine gummies on any given day. And I think I've kind of designed it particularly such that that is the case, where it is really reliant on my daily input, because I don't have currently any full-time employees. I kind of have a distributed network of agencies and freelancers and part-time folks. But over the first kind of 18 months of building this, it truly was just me getting up on a daily basis and pushing the business forward. I think the other thing is that, and again, I'm not telling anyone that listens to this podcast anything, it was that these businesses are just super hard. Like the physics of these businesses are just, frankly, terrible relative to most businesses. And we do it because we love seeing our physical products in the world. Hopefully some of our products can have a positive impact on people's lives. There is something interesting about, owning a brand and operating a brand, but, we're starting at 100% margin. If we're lucky, only 50% of that is going into COGS. If we're lucky, only 30% of that is going into marketing. That leaves us with 20% potential margin to run the business. And the secondary thing here is that like, you're damned if you grow and you're damned if you don't, right? If you grow too quickly in CPG, really tough to fund inventory to fuel that growth. And if you don't grow, then you don't grow, and you don't have a big business on your hands. So the physics of this business are just tough. And I knew that, into this. I spent my career in D2C, but kind of seeing it firsthand is I think just another level of challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think scale and growth is always the goal, but then it just brings about a new set of challenges, right? Especially like you said, on the brand side, you got inventory, you got to scale the operations. The scale doesn't come with significant investment to be able to support that scale and then scale even further.
Yep, totally.
What are your predictions for 2024? Whether that's marketing or consumer, when you sit here and think of the year ahead, what are some predictions you have, and just in terms of what you think is going to be some of the key trends this year?
So I'll stay away from macroeconomic predictions because, what do I know? But I do think that these businesses are pretty exposed to macro conditions, sometimes positively. Like when the economy's bad, big brands are pulling out of meta spend, and that's actually good for a little brand. So not saying it's all positively correlated, but there are macro conditions here that we should all be aware of. I would say, more specific to kind of the scale brand that I think, we'll continue to see both Meta and TikTok, and I think probably YouTube at some point, Google, YouTube, just close the gap between ad and transaction. So we're already seeing that with TikTok Shops. I think Meta Shops it's growing, and it's only going to become more important. The product is totally under optimized today. For example, like you can't do subscriptions on Meta Shops, right? That's a huge barrier for a brand like mine to truly invest in it. That'll change over time. Commerce on YouTube makes all the sense in the world, right? You're watching a video, they're talking about a product, it should be one click to purchase. If they don't have that already, and I think they will. And then you're seeing tools like Format that are kind of like closing that gap as well. So yeah, I think just add to transaction, that gap is going to close. I think we'll start to see, influencers, creators are going to become continuously more important to brands. But I think challengingly, as that importance grows and as more and more creators they recognize their power with some of these brands, it's going to be interesting to see where the true value accrues. Like if Jake Paul and KSI were starting a new brand today, the economics for the non-celebrity operator of that brand would be so bad, right? Like they know their value now, right? And that's at the largest scale, but I think that all trickles down to all influencers. The price of influencers is going to go up because it's just become super apparent that if you have a trusted audience, you're so valuable for these brands, and thus the prices will rise. Those are kind of two key marketing ones. It'll be interesting to see like what TikTok looks like in the US in the next couple of years. I think a lot of that will hinge on the 2024 election, which again, I have no business speaking about, but it's funny how all these kind of macroeconomic and political events can trickle down and impact small brand owners like me.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? It does have an impact, but you never want to place blame on anything that happens within your business on something that is macro, but it does still have an impact.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And what are you most excited about for the brand this year? What's coming? Is there anything you don't have to tell anything that you're not happy sharing, obviously, but you mentioned potentially retail, some announcements. Is like, what are you most excited about for the brand? Yeah,
I think our retail footprint, our ground game is going to get a lot sharper over the next 12 months. We've historically kind of lived in bits in the cloud as an e-commerce brand, and I think we'll start to show up in the real world in more instances over the next 12 months. So I'm excited about that. Frankly, that's a totally new game to me. So from a personal perspective, I'm excited to learn that side of retail CPG. And I think like this is something I struggle with and think about all the time, is like keeping the main thing. We built a relatively large customer base. We have all the kind of operational support to really launch any supplement that we want to at this point. And the challenge is like, can you stay focused enough to almost not do that? Can you not launch that like other gummy that is not core to the creatine gummy, but like would certainly in the first couple of weeks be incremental to revenue? Can you not shoot yourself in the foot by launching a creatine powder because all of your customers are asking for creatine powder instead of creatine gummies, and just sticking to creatine gummies? So I think that's like what I'm most excited about, is kind of feeling out how long the runway is on creatine gummies over the next 12 months, and keeping the main thing. That could change in like, a couple of years as the business starts to mature, like saturate some of our core channels and core demos. But right now it's like the fun and challenging thing is like, hey, you're making a long leverage bet on creatine gummies. Like, how can you do everything to ensure that bet goes well?
Yeah, love that. Really appreciate you being on. I haven't tried the gummies yet, but I will. I'm going to step back into my creatine game. I go to the gym twice a day, so it's like I probably should be taking some creatine and some supplements. So I'm excited to try the product. I'm excited to continue watching you grow the brand. I mean, congratulations on everything you're building, and just I really like a lot of your answers and just the philosophy for how you think things. It's not just spray and pray and you're just kind of winging it. I know we're all winging it to a degree, but the philosophies seem grounded in really sensible kind of frameworks. So love seeing what you're building. Congratulations. Do stay focused. Don't go too left field. No one needs more creatine powder. goodness me, there's thousands of them out there. And just thank you so much again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, Daniel, this was fun. Thank you.